Hello, Tummy and Cruise fans. It's me, Candace, here for another author event. And tonight I'm really excited because it is spooky season and we are talking about vampires. And I'm so excited about that. Specifically, romantic vampires, which is even better. So I'm really excited about tonight's author event. And tonight we are talking with Marlene Perez, who is the author of paranormal and urban fantasy books, including the best-selling Dead Is series for teens. The first book in the series was Dead Is the New Black, and it was named for an ALA quick pick for reluctant young readers, as well as an ALA popular paperback. Dead Is Just a Rumor was on Voya's 2011 Best Sci-Fi Horror and Fantasy list. Marlene's novels have been featured in Girls Life, 17, and Cosmopolitan. She grew up in Story City, Iowa, and she is the youngest of 12 children. She currently lives in Orange County, California. And I believe she said when we were talking that this is her 16th book. And this is the second book in the series. The first one was called The Afterlife of the Party. And she'll be in conversation with Alys Arden, whom all of you probably know by now. But Alys is a local author. She was raised by the street performers, tea leaf readers, and glittering drag queens of the French Quarter. And she cut her teeth on the streets of New York. She's worked all around the world. She either talks too much or not at all. Her hair ranges from eggplant to cotton candy colored. And she is the author of the Casket Girls series, which I know many of you have read. Her debut novel, The Casket Girls, garnered over 1 million reads online before it was acquired. And the fourth book is The Gates to Guinea, and that was released last year. And we have signed copies of all of her books in stock. And she's working on a graphic novel, Zatanna, The Jewel of Gravesend, and that is coming out, I think, next year, hopefully from DC Comics. So welcome, Alys and Marlene. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to peace out and watch.
We'll be here. Thank you, Candace. Hi, Marlene.
Hi.
One thing that's always interesting about doing these videos, I always find one thing that's interesting about doing these videos is when you're in different time zones and it looks like really spooky, like starting to be at night because I'm on the East Coast and it's still like bright and sunny where you are.
It's so weird. We had this huge lightning storm last night. First of all, the song is right. It never rains in California, and very, very seldom. But it was like pouring down rain, and it was lightning, and I was like, "Oh, it is fall." That
nice.
Is like it. So I'm ready, even though it's like sunshine all the time right now. But I'm ready for fall.
Well, I am on the East Coast and I'm going back to New Orleans this week. And I just assume that the tiny bit of fall that I've started to get is going to go away when I get back home and it's blazing. Although I haven't checked the weather, I'm just assuming for the worst. So I will be back not breaking out the flannel. So happy book birthday. Today is actually the release day for I'm with the Band, which is the second book in the Afterlife series. And there you have with your super cute covers. As I said, I'm not home, so I don't have any books to show, or Marlene's book to show. But I can't wait to get home and get all my book mail that has been accumulating for the last 8 weeks. So, but instead of me reading the description of the book, since you're here, why don't you tell us about the book, but also maybe the first book, since maybe some readers here haven't read the first book.
Yeah. So The Afterlife of the Party is about Tansy Mariotti and her two friends who go to a party to see a band, which I'm sure many of us have done. But that party changes her life because she runs into a band of vampires. So that is, The Afterlife of the Party is kind of with about her attempts to get her best friend away from these vampires who are bad. Like I'm not sure. Are your vampires like the romantic love interest vampires? Or are they bad guys? Mine are like bad guys.
Mine are definitely kill unrelentlessly, but are also the romantic lead. So I don't know what that says about me or my reader.
Got it. Well, I have so I always hedge my bets because the main character is she comes from a family of witches. Tansy comes from a family of witches, and once she's bitten by a vampire, it doesn't happen the way it normally happens when you're bitten by a vampire.
Oh, that's cool.
Happens. Yeah, and so I kind of and I love all of the vampires in all of the forms. So, but my vampires are definitely bad vampires, and the afterlife of the party kind of deals with a little bit. I was kind of inspired by, the idea: what if the Cullens were monstrous jerks, only not jerks? And then I kind of thought about I love music, and like the Dead It series has a lot of music in it, and the afterlife of the party, I'm with the band, and A Sucker for You all are kind of inspired. The titles are inspired by titles of songs. And so I started reading all of this kind of terrible stuff about my favorite musicians and how they treated their fans. And so that's kind of like the inspiration for the afterlife of the party. And in the afterlife of the party, they're kind of like an emo band. And in I'm with the band, they show up again. They were the Drainers, and they in each book they kind of change the band because I really want to kill. I really want to kill some band members, but I have to kind of wait and see. And there's like a lot of kind of terrible vampires in the book, so everybody's like, I really hope you get to kill that vampire. I'm like, well, I really want to kill that vampire too, but I think this.
But it's a trilogy, so we're gonna have to maybe see when that's gonna happen.
Yeah, I really, really want to kill that vampire. So, yeah, so that, and then I'm with the band is the second book, and A Sucker for You is the third book, and that'll be out in 2022, like August of 2022. So they're kind of mashups. Like I love. I love pop culture. I love music. I love humor, and I have a really kind of dark, weird sense of humor. And so there's a lot of weird.
I think you can tell just by the titles, and even when I was looking at your other book series. So it's funny that you brought up the title because that was the first thing that I was going to ask, which I'm guessing that's what everyone asks you since you already started talking about it. But all of the titles are very funny and kind of like whimsical and cute and funny, even though it's like dark genres. So is that like your trademark, or is that just kind of happened with those series?
I think my publisher calls it when snark meets dark. And I think that's kind of like me. Like, everybody's always like, oh, you don't look like you're, you don't look like you have this terribly dark sense of humor and you love ghoulish things, but I do. And so, like I'm sure a million people have said this, but like Lost Boys and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I really loved Sunshine by Robin McKinley. I loved that book, and I read all the Anne Rice books, and I've always read tons of vampire stuff, and I've always wanted to write like a straight up vampires are vicious, brutal predator kind of novel. So yeah, I do think though, I really think that titles are really important, and it always bums me out when my publisher makes me change it, which doesn't really happen that often, but it's kind of like that little, it's like a super tiny summary of your whole book. And so I spend a lot of time on my titles, right? Like do you find yourself like, oh, I don't want that title, or your publisher will suggest something, or you'll suggest something, and then do you have a title before you write, or do you just write the book and then decide?
So it kind of depends. So the Casket Girls is, and so guys out there, Marlene had told me right before we got on that she was reading the Casket Girls right now. So I'm gonna say this like without spoiling, like you'll find out what the title means. I don't know, around the end of part 1 of the book, if you don't already know. But so when I was writing that book, it was kind of a placeholder name because it's kind of like the name of one of the urban legends in the book. So then once that book was out, the nomenclature kind of stuck. So all the subsequent books are titled after one of the urban legends from the novel. But it was interesting, or like the only kind of like interesting anecdote that I have about titling was when I was writing the second book, the name of the book had already been released. And the actual, this is when I was writing the first draft. So like the actual urban legend of the book, I hadn't really found a way to work it in the book, and I was like getting really close to the end of the draft, and there's multiple urban legends in the book, so like the theme of that structure was still there, but like this actual one, and it just kind of like kept moving around in the draft, and I was getting super scared because I was like, I don't think this is going to end up being in the book, and like the title's already been released, and like it can't have the name The Romeo Catchers. And then I was talking to like a bunch of different people about it, like running different titles by them, and everyone was just like, all of those titles are terrible. And then a big editor was like, you can't change the Romeo Catchers, that's a great title. And then it all worked out because not only did the legend like slide right in place where it should have been, but at the end of that book, an event happens, and it kind of gives the title like a double meaning.
Oh, I love it. I love that.
Absolutely, like I did it on purpose the whole time, and I love it when that happens with writing, when you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally a genius, and you're like, huh. It like barely worked out by the skin of my teeth.
Oh yeah, yeah. I know, like with the Dead Is books, when I sold the Dead Is books, it was only a trilogy. So
wow.
if there are any writers listening, think long term about your titles, because by the time it was like book number 8, they all had to be Dead Is, and you know, after a while, it's like Dead is the new Dead is the new black. That's great. Okay, Dead is the state of mind. Okay, you know, like kind of like those phrases we always say. But by number 8, I was starting to sweat. I was like, what am I going to call this book? So, and titles are kind of like fun. I always have fun with titles, and I love it when my writer friends are like, "Oh, I need help with a title," and I'm like, "Oh, here I am."
Oh man, I'm coming to you. Yeah, I feel like I have horrible code names for manuscripts, you know, and then eventually like it really kind of becomes that, and then I'm like, how could I ever call this other than like the Red Book, you know, or something. Yeah. I've been calling it for so long when you're writing, and like because you have to have something to call it, like when you're talking to your close friends that know about the book, or your editors or agents, or you know, anyone involved, and until stuff starts to have a name, it's really hard to converse. And I've learned even that with characters, like don't just have placeholder names for anything, because I'm lazy and it'll just stick, and then I won't go back and change it.
Yeah, or like, you know, you love like my thing is I love a name, and then I'll be like, oh, I already used that name. Wait a minute. And I won't remember because it'll be like 5 books ago, you know, and I'm like, oh, I can't believe I used that name again. I used Rose, which I love, like floral names for some reason, because the Dead Is series, the sisters and the Psychic Sisters in the Dead Is series, they all had flower names.
So I love that.
One sister's name was Rose, and then in Afterlife of the Party, I have identical twin sisters named Rose and Thorn, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I used Rose again, but
at least it's not the same series. It's
yeah. But also, I think I love to look up character like names, the meanings of names, and like, so Tansy means immortal. And so that was like really, really like, I was like, I have to use, I actually had another kind of manuscript that I hadn't finished. And another character had that name, Tansy. And I was like, oh no, it has to be Afterlife of the Party. I'm stealing that name. So now I have.
Oh, I've definitely done that before.
Unfinished manuscript with the main character has no name now. So.
Nice. So does that mean that the third book is done, or at least a draft?
A draft.
Why did I ask that? That's like the question that all authors hate.
It is in mid fix all of these holes and.
Hey, that counts as a draft.
And how you painted yourself in that corner, and you have to figure out how you're going to get yourself out of that plot corner. That's where I'm at right now. So, yeah.
And just so everyone knows, this trilogy is sequential, so it is best to read them in order. I try to say that at the top because my series definitely, like, you cannot absolutely not read it out of order. You will not understand anything.
Right. I think mine is like that too. Like, the Dead Is books, you can totally, well, for the most part, you can kind of read them out of order because they're like paranormal mysteries, and there's like there is an overarching kind of plot thing, but each book has its own little mystery,
own little whodunit, yeah.
And so it's easier. But with my trilogy, they definitely have to be read in order, or you're not gonna get, like you said, it's like it won't make sense. So.
Okay, so we know there's vampires, and you said that there's witches. Are there any other supernaturals in this trilogy?
In book number 2, I added werewolves and hellcats.
Oh, tell me about hellcats.
Yeah, I wanted.
Is that like a hellhound but a cat?
Yes, exactly. I wanted to do something different, and I wanted. I had this cat. My cat recently died. She was like 18 years old, and she'd been around forever. And anyway, I this cat would, like, she was so evil, but loving at the same time. Like, she was like kind of a badass, but like sweet. And so I wanted an animal in the series because I love animals, but I wanted it to be something a little bit different. You know what I mean? It's like, we've seen hellhounds, and so there's a hellcat named Hecate. I can't even talk. Sorry. And I really love that character a lot. And so that's in there. I'm trying to think if there's anything. I don't know about you, but don't you get amnesia for like a little bit after, like, you finish a book and then,
oh yeah,
what the heck did I do? I don't remember. Or you think you already did it in book 2, but you were really saving it for book 3. Like, so I have a couple things that I had to go back and go, did I do that in book 2, or was I thinking about it? And there's like this one intense scene that I wrote in book 1, and my editor was like, I don't think that's the right place for book 1. So then I moved it to book 2, and she's like, well, maybe we should move it to book 3. So now it's at book 3. But I think there are a couple of kind of things that I've tweaked. There's a character in book 3 that is kind of inspired by a traditional like paranormal creature, but then I tweaked it a little bit, just to kind of, I don't know. Do you like to take, when you use urban legends, do you kind of follow those exactly, or do you just, play around with them?
One of the interesting things about urban legends, which I think is a little different from kind of playing with the tropes of folklore, like vampires and werewolves and stuff, is typically there's very little information. It's like 2 sentences, 6 sentences kind of worth of story. And it's something that I actually really like about working with urban legends, because I do tend to try to stick like as close to like that little bit of information as I can. But then because it's so little information, it really frees you up to be like, okay, well now I'm making up like whatever I want to fill in all the blanks and like give it a origin, like a, earlier origin, extend it out, all of those things. And kind of the structure of the Cast Your Girl series is the first book's about 3 or more vampire urban legends. The second one's about ghost urban legends, and then voodoo. And it, especially the first book, the vampire one, which is kind of the crux of the series, it kind of asks, what if all 3 of those urban legends, which happen in different centuries, were like connected?
Love that.
So then, of course, I got to create all those connections, over the centuries and how it like entwined in New Orleans history and stuff like that.
Oh, so, I love that. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that's the fun part.
I like to switch it up. I like to I'm a one of the things I found about writing vampire fiction that you probably have found too is that there's so much out there that it's really, really hard to like do something that hasn't been done before, right? Like pretty much the whole the canon is so huge that like people are like, they think of 2 books usually, right? But there are so many more books than the 2 books.
There's a lot in between Dracula and Twilight.
Yes, exactly. Those are the 2 books that I was thinking of, is exactly that. Yeah, there's so much in there. And then not only that, but there's like you said, like urban myths, or like, like what people used to do because they truly believed in vampires, right? Like some of the things that they did to keep vampires away, stuff like that. I like to play with all of that information too, and just kind of mess around.
So I have a question about your werewolves, assuming it's not a spoiler. If I ever ask you anything that's a spoiler, you can just pass.
I'll pass. Yeah.
Are your werewolves like the kind that can turn at will, like shift at will, or is it like full moons out, can't control it, like shifting?
So I have 2 kinds of werewolves. I have hereditary werewolves who are born werewolves, and I have bitten werewolves. And so one can do one.
Okay. One can control it and one can't.
Yes. And I mean,
okay.
It's pretty easy to figure out.
So the first question, I'm just going to incorporate the questions as we go. I don't know if there's like a designated Q&A at the end.
I'm fine,
Yeah. Okay. So what sparked you to write this particular series?
Well, two things is one, I've always wanted to. Yay! I've always wanted to write, like I said, a really kind of traditionally vampires as a predator. I also wanted, like I said, I love all of the vampires, but I really wanted to like think about how vampires as romantic interests are it's kind of weird because they want to suck your blood. Like, it's like not.
They want to eat you. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to eat you, and it's like you're a food source, and so I really wanted to look at that, and so that was like the biggest inspiration, and I wanted to do like kind of an old school, no vegetarian vampire, but like a real vampire who is kind of awful. And like I reread Dracula, and we've kind of morphed Dracula. Like in the movies now, he's a hot guy, right? Like,
oh yeah.
But if you read the original Dracula, he was not a hot guy. So I kind of wanted to go back. Although my vampires are hot guys, but they're awful people. So, murderous predators.
I think the thing about my vampires is that's kind of the debate over the years. They're extreme. I would say they're morally gray at best. So it kind of ranges from like morally gray to like apex predator.
Right.
And the interesting thing is that like both of those things even are totally subjective, even though maybe you wouldn't think so. And I think that's one of the interesting things, especially about writing a vampire series over many, many years, because you can kind of see the readers like ebb and flow. And even if they start out thinking like, okay, this is where my morally gray like compass ends, like starts and stops. And you kind of see like as people kind of like grow and get attached to characters, how their morally gray compass kind of like stretches. And I think that's an interesting thing, especially because I've been writing a series for what seems like my entire life. But not that I'm complaining, but one of the
what's that Will Smith movie? It's based on the short story, and he's like the last human, and he's killing all the vampires, but the vampires see him as the monster, right?
Right, exactly.
That movie, I forget it, but it's older. It's an older, and it's based on I think a Philip Dick short story. I could be wrong, but anyway, it's like that's the interesting part is like, well,
exactly,
like, yeah, the vampires may see the vampire slayers as the monsters. So,
well, and those are definitely the questions that the Casket Girl asks in every book. Like, who is the monster? And it's quite literal almost in the book. So it's interesting to see people like flip-flopping, you know, from book to book. Like, he's the monster. No, he's the monster. No, she's the monster. Because it, you know, it's all circumstantial and it's all also like from the point of view, you know, so you get kind of like one set of point of view POVs in the first book, and then you get more POVs from the second book. And because the books span many centuries, in sometimes you'll see an event in a different book,
right.
But you'll see it from a different POV now, and then you might have a totally different perspective and like vehemently change your mind about what you thought about it.
In the afterlife of the party, Tansy just like she doesn't like the vampires, and she, you know, wants to just rescue her friend. But in I'm with the band, she is the queen of the vampires, right? Like she becomes the vampire queen. And so now she has to like, she's first of all, she's a teenager, like just trying to deal with like senior year in high school, but she also has to like deal with the very, you know, creatures that she thought were, you know, completely terrible. And then so she has to figure out how she can work with their like needs and rules and everything, and then still feel good about herself as a human slash vampire slash witch.
And does her kind of like moral compass start to change as she becomes more of that like predator?
Well, I think that's like the big worry in the whole book is that she is going to kind of go to the dark side, right? Like, you know, like, and so we'll see. Like, I still have a lot of things. I have some like unresolved hostility that I need to, you know, stab a few vamps in book 3. But so, you know, it's hard. Like, right? It's hard to write the ending of a trilogy and have it be a satisfying ending, and also still really kind of examine those gray areas, right? Like, you know, like I'm a Libra, so I'm really like right and wrong, and you know, really like, you know, but in my writing, I'm a little less, you know, absolute.
I'm a Leo, Scorpio moon, Scorpio rising, so you just know everyone's going to die at the end of the series, right, everyone? Just kidding.
My husband's a Scorpio, so yeah, I think that it's been really fun though. I really love to write kind of like I like to write about vampires doing bad things. Like it's kind of like, instead of everybody kind of being like that really, you know, super moral and not doing anything wrong and knowing all the answers, I kind of like having a character who doesn't really know all the answers, and she's like just trying to figure it out. And that, yeah, there are like, it's wrong to kill, but this person is terrible, and if I don't kill this vampire, they're going to continue to, hurt humans or whatever, or, kick a dog. I don't know what
And
they're going to
do you have any vampires who have done bad things who then you have had to redeem? Because that's also an interesting
do.
arc. It's a spoiler. You don't have to say it.
I am let's just say I'm struggling with that issue right now, because there are a couple of things I've written two ways. Have you ever done that? Like, oh, this could happen, or this could happen. It could go either way, right? Because like everything is a tiny little decision in real life, right? Like we decide, yes, we're going to do this, or no, we're going to do this. Today I'm going to, get up and I'm going to write 1,000 words. Today I'm going to get up and binge watch, whatever. Oh, will we see a different side to Skylar? Yeah. Some people really are ticked off at Skylar because she's not a very good friend. She's not been a very good friend lately. So that is one character that I really hope she redeems herself, because when you have your best friend, I don't know about you guys, but my best friend and I have been through a lot, and we haven't, although we try to always be there for each other, that doesn't always happen, right? Like sometimes you've got your own stuff going on. And so I hope that Skylar steps up to the plate at the end, but I can't promise that.
Yeah. I like how you said, I hope she redeems herself, as if you don't have total control over the situation, because that's how I talk about my characters and think about them too. Like whenever I'm writing, I mean, all of them, but I feel like with my protagonist, who is kind of like 16, 17 in the series, that I'm her like cool aunt, like older aunt, and I'm like, don't do it, girl, like learn from my mistakes, like, oh, I know you're gonna do it. And with the male also, I mean, more with him, as readers already know, but I'm just like, oh, you're gonna learn one day, you're gonna regret it, don't do it.
Yeah, and let's face it, if they're not making bad decisions, you don't have a book.
Yeah,
exactly. They're all making great decisions, then
yeah,
it would be kind of boring. So
well, and unfortunately for them, I put them in a lot of situations where like all of the choices are bad, and they have to decide between the best of the worst.
I love that though. That's my favorite, when you're like, oh well, how am I going to get out of this? I also really love, I love writing about characters who are not, I don't really like the term likable so much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, people will say, oh, your female character, like not Tansy so much, but maybe Skylar, like they'll be like, oh, she's not likable, but it's more important that they're interesting than they're likable, right? Like, that they're interesting to read about. And I do never want to get to the point though, like I've definitely read some books where people do stuff that is just like so outside of their core character that you've created, or that like the author has created, and then they just do something that's completely out of their core character and you don't explain it. So I have had a couple books, and don't get me started about some of the TV shows that are my favorites, because they drive me crazy. But, like they set up these artificial roadblocks and for like the romantic love triangle. And then they blow that character. The reason you love that character. I'm looking at you, Roswell. They
annihilate the character.
Yes,
so the character can get with another love interest.
Yeah, and then you don't even like the character anymore, because they're not the character that they created originally, and they've ruined that character. They've created someone that like you have this wonderful love that he's in love with her, and then he goes for the hot blonde. Like, come on, like. That's not true. That's not true love. And you just led me down the garden path. And now I want to throw my television across the room because you ruined those characters. So I always try when I'm having to make bad choices, that it should be bad choices that they would really make, right? Like,
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that you bring up something interesting, that this idea of likability, and I mean, I think we see it outside of the book world too, whether it's with public figures, politicians. I feel like it like totally is disproportionate when it comes to men and women. Like women have to be likable and female characters have to be likable. And I feel like with books, it's almost become this like interchangeable word with relatability, which is what I think people often mean. Like, I couldn't relate to the character, but they say the character wasn't likable. And it's so interesting because it's a totally different thing, because I would also say, well, I'm not trying to necessarily create likable characters. Likable, just like the definition of it is boring. So like, I don't think I would want to read that. And I certainly don't want to spend like the million hours it takes to write a book just for something to be likable. It's like, I want things to be relatable on some level. I don't think that it means that you have to like have exactly lived that character's experience, but like try to have something, in the character, whether they're good or bad, but these characters are three-dimensional enough, so you should find something that you can relate. But this whole idea of likability, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I agree, because likability is like, although I think my agent just sold this book that's about a serial killer who's likable.
Hey, I love Dexter. I love an anti-hero.
Yeah, and I think that is really interesting. That's an interesting way to go about it, right? Like to have something that seems on the surface to be likable, but then there's all this terrible stuff underneath. That's interesting. But someone who's just likable is bland. Oh, when you do that, don't do it. It says, sometimes I have to put the book down and repeat to myself, I told you not to do that.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. That is funny. Yeah, I know.
Right. So when you guys are reading the books and yelling those same, things at the characters, I'm probably yelling it at them too as I'm writing it, as if I don't have total control over what they do and don't do.
Because sometimes you feel like you don't, because if you try to get the character, if you write it the other way, because that's the way you think in your brain that it should go, and it doesn't work, it's because that character has determined that it's going to do something else, and it's usually for the best. If you find you and your character are fighting over something, let your character win. It's more interesting.
The best moments, I think, are, like, you know where it's going. You have stuff, you're doing this thing, you're typing, and then it like takes that turn to that darker place. And like, I'm sitting here and I'm like jamming, I'm like listening to the same music over and over again. And then it like comes out and I'm almost like looking around like, oh, it's gonna go there, and I'm like, as if I'm like doing something naughty and like someone's gonna catch me doing it. I do that all the time, and it'll be really funny. Not that this has happened since the pandemic has started, but like if I'm at a coffee shop or something and that happens, and then I'm like, woo, and I'm like practically talking to myself in public. That's great.
Yeah, I know. Well, I just like, I'll be talking to myself or like the dog. The dog.
Oh, talk to the dog all the time.
Yeah, the dog will set me straight. But yeah, I think that's the thing about first drafts too, is I like to kind of just let things kind of flow. I'm not really, I'm kind of a plotter because I have a general idea, and I'll write like, big fight scene here, or this is what, they should have a romantic moment, or, whatever, or where's Vaughn at? Like, where's the main character's love interest? I haven't seen him in days. Stuff like that. But for the most part, I just kind of let it kind of come out. And I tried to be more of a plotter, but it doesn't really work as well for me when I'm a plotter, when I'm like, this is what's going to happen in chapter 1. And then I realized, well, maybe that should happen in chapter 5 or something. So are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm an intense plotter. I am always like enthralled by pantsers and people who can do that. I will say when I wrote book 1, it was total pantsing. Like I knew the end and I was always just writing towards that end. Once I started working on the second book, I was like taking things more seriously then, and I was under contract. I outlined or arced out, I would say, like the rest of the whole series. But then each book, as I started, I like very intensely outline, and now like working on stuff out of that series, it's all very intensely outlined. But what I do tell people is, who ask about this stuff, I don't just tell random people this, that outlining doesn't have to be rigid, you know, like use it as a tool that's helpful. Like once it stops becoming helpful, it's not a very good tool, you know, so like it doesn't have to be something rigid or stifling. Like it's, for me, it's kind of like a roadmap. So I'm very scheduled. So like I need to get up and like get done what I need to get done. You know, and of course the day will vary, stuff comes up, whatever, I have to shuffle the schedule around. But in order to meet my deadlines, like I really need that. I need to know what I'm doing kind of like when I get up. I don't have the luxury like some people, you know, to take a long time. So the outline definitely helps me focus. But like if I mean, all the time, it's like, oh yeah, I thought this was going to be 1 chapter. It's going to be 3 chapters. Or like, I don't need this scene. We've already kind of like covered the ground that scene was going to cover, delete it, you know, or like stuff comes up, it goes in a different direction. So I would also say that I'm almost like a re-outliner as much as I am an outliner, because to me, the outline is just like this living, breathing document that's like constantly evolving, constantly being updated. But it's also this like parachute, like, if you will, that like if I'm lost, I always have it to like guide me back to where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, I do. Like I mean, I don't completely pants, so I'll have like, okay, I know I'm going to write this many chapters. I know, you know, I know the beginning big bullet points, the middle big bullet points, and the end big bullet points. But I have some friends who write like, you know, 200-page outlines. And yeah, I can't do that. I'm kind of like an, I guess, in-betweener, because like,
Yeah.
I do think an outline does kind of give you a starting point in the morning when you're like, okay, what do I need to do today? And then you're like, okay, this is what I need to write in chapter, you know, 3, 4, and 5 today or whatever. So I'm not completely like, just like, oh, I'm going to meander. And like you, I have like deadlines that I have to, you know, stick to, because if you don't stick to your deadlines,
you won't have any more deadlines.
Yeah. And like people are waiting for you. There's like a whole marketing team and a whole publicity team and a whole editorial team. And they're like, hey, where's that book at? And there's always like a little wiggle room for life. But I always try to figure out my first draft schedule, you know, kind of get that done. And then I always try to have like a little side project that I'm, you know, contemplating, because what happens is you need a break sometimes. You need to let that writing cool, right? Like sometimes you just need to let it cool so you can think about it. And then I like to work on a little something else while I'm doing that, because, you know, especially, so I'm thinking a lot about my 3rd book. So it's the end of the trilogy, and you have a lot of ground to cover in the 3rd book, where you have to kind of tie up all these. So I have a list of things to make sure that I've, you know, addressed in the book. So I do guess I do a little bit of outlining.
Yeah.
Not too much, but a little out. I'm a little outliner, a lot of pants.
It also just really depends on the project, you know. So the Casket Girls is incredibly complex as far as the mystery goes. So the outline also definitely helps me track clues and like the components of the mystery and like when all the reveals are happening, and it's like threaded timelines and stuff like that. So
I do always do a timeline. That's like, especially when you're dealing with werewolves. Traditionally, you have to kind of figure out where full moons are and like stuff like that. Like, so I always try to do a timeline, and I always try to do kind of a basic outline, and also things that have kind of been left boiling, right? Like on the pot, boiling on a low simmer. All of the stuff that I kind of need to get to for the next book. But I think it's really fun to plot like more than one book at it, to kind of go through that whole thing and where are your characters at the beginning of the story, and where your characters are at the end of the story, and you know, have you had a satisfying journey? That's, you know.
Absolutely. For sure. No one's really given me a hard time about this, which has been nice. But I am writing the 5th and final book in the Casket Girl series, but I also wrote, which I'm like very close to finishing, the first book in a new series in between book 4 and book 5. And I think everyone, like, at the end of the day will be happy, because then when they finish book 5, even though it'll be a totally different series, they won't have to wait like forever, you know, for like the next thing. So that's what I'm hoping.
But I as a reader, I like, you know, like I want to read, like there's 3 books in this series and I know it, and it's like, I love it when I find a new author and I'm like, oh, she has 12 books in this series and I haven't read any of them, right? I don't have to wait at all. But it's harder when, so I feel your pain when you're like, oh, but it does take, like, right, it takes time to get there. I know some people write faster and some people write slower than I do, but it takes the time that it takes, right? Like,
and every book is different, you know, like, and I think it depends on what's going on in your life and what's going on in the world. You know, all those things. Yeah, all those things affect the speed in which I write, you know. I definitely tabled a book that I was starting in 2020 because it was just a really dark book and the world was becoming so dark, and like TCG is already pretty dark. So I was just like, even though I love the idea, like I love that book and I'm definitely going to write it, but I was like, I need something that's like not quite so deep. And so I am working on something that's really fun and really sexy, and it was such a good decision for my own mental health.
I agree. I had a harder time than I usually do. It was just such a 2020 was a really hard year, and I was like, I don't want to. Normally, I read kind of like everything, right? And I write a bunch of different projects that are, you know, but I was working on something that was really, really dark, kind of on the side, and I was like, you know what? I do not. Why am I writing this when I have no desire to read it right now? I want to be fun, funny, you know, lovely, romantic, sexy, all of anything but like depressing, you know, real life stuff. And so I was there too. And so I'm kind of like, well, I'm going to write some fun stuff. But then, you know, my poor agent, I'll send him log lines and he'll be like, you want to write what now? Like, yeah, that's it. So he's always like, okay, all right, I'll try and sell it. That's fine. But I think it's because I like to read a lot of different things. I bet you're the
Yeah.
same way. So, like you like to read a lot of different things, so you naturally want to write the things that you love to read, and so
Yeah.
that's why I like to switch it up a little bit and write it.
Definitely. And all of that's subjective too, so like dark for me is like not dark for another person, and light for me is not light for another person for sure.
Yeah, it really depends, and it's so weird that Netflix, all the murder shows were so popular. Like I watch them too, but like The Making of a Murderer and Serial and like all of those, and I'm like, I need a little, Emily in Paris instead of
Yeah, I mean, even I've never really gotten into stand-up because I'm just such on the other end of the spectrum. But during the pandemic, I think I watched like 80% of the stand-up specials on Netflix just because I was like, quarantining like for so long, and it just kind of felt like someone was in your living room with you.
It was like a million other people. I was watching the Great British Bake Off, and I was like, I think I can do that.
Oh, I was watching like reruns of the Great British Bake Off.
That's no, I cannot do that.
Yeah, when you really need to be pulled out of a dark hole, put on the Great British Bake Off.
Yeah. It's so soothing. You don't even have to. But I think that always does kind of impact your creativity, and like I have a lot of weird little quirky humor, and I always try to laugh, but sometimes it's harder to write down humorous stuff when you just want to stab a vampire,
Yeah.
like I was feeling pretty hostile. And so I worked out a few of my my hostilities by writing it down. So I was going to ask you, so what are you working on right now?
Well, I'm working on book 5, everyone, I swear. Which is, such an interesting experience because it's the finale of the whole thing. So book 4 was very fun because a lot of the really, really, really big reveals that I've been saving, for the whole time came out finally. And of course there's more for book 5, but I think over the holidays, I am going to be doing like my read of the whole series just to make sure that my list of all the loose ends that I think are not tied up, I don't miss any of them. So when I really start this next draft of that, I'm like checking all the boxes. But I am working on 2 projects that I can't really say anything about, but one is an adult paranormal. So it's the first time I've ever written an adult, so that's been super interesting and fun, and kind of liberating.
Yeah.
So I can't wait, and I'm like going to be finished this week, and I'm so excited to be finished.
And do you write I find that I write the best in the morning, like when
I'm totally a morning writer.
Yeah, I write I like to get it done and over, and then I always feel accomplished for the rest of the day, and I'm like, oh, now I can do my fun thing. But also I just think so I always try, so I drop off my twins at school, and then I come back home, I walk the dog, and then I sit down and I try to get in like maybe 3 hours, and that's usually enough for me to get like my word count. But then I've heard some people write like 5,000 words a day. I cannot.
Oh no,
I could not write that many words a day.
No, I can't. If I'm overlapping on 2 projects, I could maybe get like a combined 5,000 words, like some on one project and some on the other. But unless like right now, because I'm at the end of the book and I'm kind of in the climax, and things are going really fast, and I'm like trying to stick to the schedule, and all of that. So I can definitely have days where I'm writing 5, 6 even more 1,000 words, but like that is not normal. You know,
Right.
like the rest of the manuscript was not like that at all.
It's like you're getting towards the end. You're like,
oh yeah.
yeah.
And you have that momentum. The pacing is super fast. You're also just trying to push through it. I think at the end of book 2, the last day that I wrote 12,000 words. You know, because it was just like I was behind schedule. Like I was like, and I worked full time. So I was like, it was a Sunday. I was going back to work the next day. I was like, I got to like get this done.
I don't think I've written 12,000 words in one day ever. Like,
but again, not normal at all. You know, normally I'm like 2,000, very happy with 2,000, you know, and then I'll do editing or work on a pitch or do marketing, administrative stuff, you know, but I am definitely, now that I'm juggling so much, trying to do 2,000 words on like the main project that I'm working on, and then do 1,000, not 3, realistically, you know, because I'm of the mind of like trying to get usable words, not just
words,
a lot of words, and then tomorrow I'm going to throw out half of them, you know, so Candace is telling us there's 5 minutes left, so if anyone has questions, make sure you get them in. But what are you working on right now? You take the last 5 minutes. Tell us, like, tell everyone, you know, what they need to know.
I'm kind of like you. I can't like really say what I'm working on. And you know, here's the other thing is like I don't like to talk too much about things that I haven't finished, because if I talk about it a lot, my little brain,
I know,
gets the idea that, oh, you've done all that work. Come on, you know, but it's not really done. And so I have let's see, what do I have that I am really, I have a adult romantic comedy that I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stumbled upon this author. Her name's Mary Adkins, and she does all of these like kind of online classes and stuff. And I happened to take one of her classes, and she talked about writing in 5 notebooks. And I always like to write by hand at some point, because it really does use a different part of your brain, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of got started that because anybody who's been sitting in a pickup line for kids, it's like a 20 thing where you're just like sitting there. And so I always bring a notebook, and I always write. But this project, I wrote the entire thing out without typing it, and it was driving me crazy to do that. It was so hard because I had no idea how many words I had, right? Or like, it was. And so I finished the handwritten stuff, and then now I'm typing it up, and I'm like, wow, it feels good. I feel like I'm almost done. But on the other hand, like it still, it almost feels like I'm doing it twice, because I
wrote a second draft. You are, because you're changing stuff and you're self-editing. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and then I have this other adult kind of mystery thing that I'm working on. So, you know, I don't know why there we go. Where can they find me on social media? I do have a Facebook group. It's called Welcome to Nightshade, because my that is books they take place in Nightshade, California. And I am Mar Perez author on Instagram. And there's really a lot of fun things happening this week on Instagram. They're doing an Instagram book tour, and there's like prizes and like fun things. And so that is me I'm on Twitter, but I don't really go on Twitter very often, just because I like pretty pictures and fun people and nice, you know, I need some self-care. And so Twitter is not my primary source of social media lately. Instagram is more where I'm at all the time. So
nice.
and MarlenePerez.com too.
Yes, and you can find all of her books on her website, like I did earlier, all of her other series and her backlist. And there's a lot of paranormal stuff there. And I know that this group, New Orleans in general, has a lot of paranormal and urban fantasy readers. So it's been really great to have you in our little corner.
Thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait to finish the Casket Girls. I'm like, yay! I'm not writing about vampires, so I can read about vampires.
I know, and I can't wait to get home and have your books in the mail.
And the good thing about Alys's books is that they are pretty accurate when it comes to New Orleans and how she describes New Orleans. I find that not all New Orleans books are created equal when it comes to that, but Alys's books do a very good job because she's from here of painting the picture of New Orleans. And so one final question from the audience, just because I really like this one. If you had to be one, would you be a vampire or a werewolf?
Vampire.
It's so funny. I feel like before this year, my answer always 100% of the time was vampire. But after this year, because of Secret Project, I might have a different answer. So please come back and ask that question when I can talk about this book.
If anyone cares about me, I have been and always will be.
We care about you.
Well, in the audience, I don't know. I'm not an author. I don't know if people care about what I would be or not, but I have been and always will be a werewolf.
I knew you were going to say that.
I am like Sierra just said. I have a pack always. I am not a loner. I am very like friend and family oriented with my pack, and I am definitely warm blooded and all of that. So that's why I say I would be a werewolf.
I think also this is a good opportunity to plug your creature book, even though it's not out yet.
Sure. Why not? I'm working on a book right now. It's called Carnival of Creatures, and if you're into tabletop RPGs, this is going to be kind of like, so if you play D&D, there's a monster manual for all the monsters. Ooh. This is kind of like that. This is a tabletop RPG supplement. It is a monster manual, though I can't say that. So we call it Carnival of Creatures, and it is all monsters from Louisiana myth and legend. So we have 20 monsters in there. Of course, we have vampires, but our vampires are pretty specific. They're the Carter brothers, which if you don't know that myth, it's really interesting. So we have all kinds of different creatures in there, but all of them are very specific to a Louisiana myth or legend. So it's really fun to do, and it has gotten pushed back now because we've had a hurricane and everything. So it's probably not going to be out until January. We're really hoping to try and get it out for Halloween, but yeah, Carnival of Creatures, and it's on Tubby and Coo's website if you're interested. It's tubbyandcoos.com/Carnival of Creatures. You can go there and find out all about it. I have a list of monsters that's in there if you're interested.
And it's all illustrated. It's really cool.
I am totally interested. We do Bookmas at our house every year.
Oh, cool.
And so I might have to get a copy and just put a little, not till January in there for them, but
that would be awesome.
Sounds amazing.
I worked with a local artist on it. We're both queer folk, if that matters to people. And I basically just approached her. She's a children's book author, artist, a children's book illustrator, and so I approached her and I was like, "You're a nerd. Do you want to like do this book with me?
You want to make some monsters with me?
You want to nerd out with me?
Look, I have ideas and I can write, but I cannot draw to save my life. Like I can barely draw a stick person. So I was like, "Do you want to draw this?" And she was like, "Oh my gosh, yes, this sounds amazing." So it worked out because I definitely am not an artist, but I can write things.
Pre-order it. Pre-order.
And order Marlene's book. Oh, right behind me here. I'm with the band, and Alys's books are the Casket Girls. Thank you so much, Marlene and Alys, for having this conversation. It was really fun and perfect for spooky season. So really appreciate having you both
Kick off
here.
October.
Yes.
Happy birthday, Marlene. Bye, Candace.
Happy book birthday. Bye, everybody. Oh, wait. And everyone, here's where you can order books. Just here's where. Tubby and Coos, if you're watching
your
this.
local bookstore.
Yes, please. Please do. And support us early this year because the supply chain's really messed up.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, for watching. And thanks, Alys, and thanks, Marlene. And everybody have a good evening.